implementation meeting, we met about 6 months ago in May to have a conversation about the future of Casa Loma, not only this building, but also the properties to the north of Austin Terrace. How many folks were there in May? Hands straight up. Not too many. Okay. We do have 50 copies of the summary of what happened at the meeting. It was really helpful in terms of understanding public priorities for the future of the site. So we'll get into that a little bit more as the meeting unfolds. But before we go any further, first of all, I'm Nicole Swern. I'm here as an independent facilitator tonight. I have my own little firm. I'm here with my colleague Bianca, and we work on projects to help facilitate constructive discussions. We don't have a vested interest in the outcome of the projects. So you'll see us tonight facilitating a conversation and taking notes on the meeting, which we will share with you, of course. So before I get into it in a lot more detail, I know that your two local councillors are ready to sort of give some welcoming remarks and set the stage. So we'll start off with Councillor Josh Matlow, I think. Follow up with Councillor Joe Mahavic. And just to sort of give you the lay of the land. And following the welcome, we'll have a quick presentation from Mike Williams, who's the General Manager of Economic Development for the city, and then we'll go into a discussion. And there'll be lots of time for questions throughout. So I'll just hand it over to the two of you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight to join this conversation. It really is such a tribute to Casa Loma and the love that our city has for it, the fact that every table is full and all of you are here to contribute. This has been, as far as possible, a consultative process. Back in May, we started with a small room and started hearing feedback from you about the import of keeping a public, accountable board to oversee Casa Loma, that we need to consider the future not only of this grand building, but also its adjacent properties on its campus, and to ensure that while we look for new ways, new sources of revenue to deal with the large backlog in capital repairs, which is needed, that it's not solely focused on revenue generation, but whatever we do, it's about celebrating, protecting, and sharing Casa Loma with future generations of Torontonians. So while we discover together what is the right fit, what is the right model to both bring in much needed new revenue to fix up this fabulous place, but also to ensure that we share it with future generations. We also, as local councillors, we're very aware that for many years now, there's been an ongoing conversation that has had far too many false starts in this city to create a museum of Toronto. This has started and stopped and started and stopped. The last discussion was considering Old City Hall next to, of course, New City Hall. And we know now that that won't be open for a museum use for many years because of the courts that are going to remain there. And it would cost roughly $100 million to retrofit the atrium that was to be the place where the museum would have been hosted. So when the opening arrived at, what are we going to do with Casa Loma? What options will we consider? Councillor Mahavic and I realized that we needed to contribute this idea now. This is the window of opportunity to finally create a museum for our city. If you go to cities like Chicago, New York, Budapest, London, frankly, every city that is a world-class city beyond the rhetoric of calling itself has a museum of its own. And what we'd like to hear from you tonight is, along with your vision and your contribution, your ideas for revitalizing this grand casa and its adjacent properties on the campus. What are your hopes and dreams for a museum? Some of the suggestions that we've considered, for example, is to use the adjacent properties on the north side of Austin Terrace, primarily for the museum, and then using some of the space in Casa Loma itself to be the entrance, the gateway, and then using the tunnel as the connection. So we'd like to hear from you. How do you think it would work? How would exhibits work here? Ultimately, we hear from a lot of people, my age, your age, other ages, that we have very fond memories of coming to Casa Loma when we were children. But far too often, people tell me that they haven't been given a reason to return. Well, we gave you a reason tonight to be here because you love this place, because you want to be part of the solution that we're seeking. But ultimately, the solution shouldn't simply be about fixing up the properties. It's about opening it up to Torontonians, to students and tourists alike. Lastly, the City of Toronto has hundreds of artifacts that are stored away, hidden from public view, downtown on Atlantic Avenue. I think this is shameful. This is our story. This is who we are. And it's time that we not only protect it, but that we share it, that we know our story, and ultimately have a place to come and celebrate. And what better place than in one of Canada's most historical homes. So I thank you for being here. Thank you for your contributions. And ultimately, it will be together that we are successful at protecting, sharing, and celebrating Sir Henry's history, our community's history, and our cities. With no further ado, I'd like to invite my illustrious colleague, Joe Mahevic, to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. This is so wonderful to be here to see such a good crowd of folks here. So here's the scoop. Councillor Matlow, we're actually in Councillor Matlow's ward, but if you cross Austin Terrace, you're in my ward. That's why we're conspiring, we're working together on this project. But just to put this in context a little bit, 1930s happens. The owner of this property, Henry Pellet, can't pay his taxes. Pay your taxes, because we'll take your house. Couldn't pay his taxes, so the city took over, didn't know what to do with it, couldn't afford it. Kiwanis comes in and for 80 years takes care of it. But in the modern economy, it was not able to basically pull it together with the right expertise to make sure that this was a strong tourism attraction, the tourism numbers were going down, and a strong event location that was also not doing very well. So we, the city now, it's back in our hands, and we have to decide what to do with it. Council has decided, on the basis of a lot of consultation that has gone on up hitherto forth, to basically do a request for proposals for this site, especially the south of Austin Terrace site, to think through what it might look like as an event space and as a tourist attraction, to up our game in that area. That's an important piece that's council decided. Now, one of the things that happened in one of the meetings, and the gentleman right here, John, was the one who tweaked it in at least for me. When we think of Casa Loma, we think of that wonderful ad that we see, especially if we're traveling abroad, of this particular house. But Casa Loma is actually a campus. It's a complex. It's several buildings. And I was born and raised in this city, and I can tell you some of the etchings and some of the buildings north of Austin Terrace are the same. They're from the 50s and 60s. They haven't changed a bit. And we know that as a city, we've been trying to figure out, well, what do you do with it? There's not even a washroom in the stables. Like, how do you make that interesting space? How do we do that? And we know, too, that there's been discussion in the city of Toronto about having a museum. But every time we think about it, we think big, as Torontonians, I guess, are apt to do. And because we think so big, it's millions and tens of millions of dollars. And right now, in this economy, that ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen at Old City Hall because you need close to $100 million to do a museum there because of all the digging and just the architecture of the place. So the thought came to us, okay, there's that land here, there's this land here, we want reasons to come back. We have a discussion with David Crombie, former mayor of Toronto, and he was very wise inside. He said, we have 1,000 museums already in Toronto. A little bit is in the basement of the Eaton's family's estate. A little bit is in a particular ethnic group. They have it stored in some church hall somewhere in the back. There are so many stories out there that need telling. I got an email just a couple of days ago from some representatives of the fashion industry who want to tell the fashion story and want to use part of this site to tell the fashion story. And that's just the beginning. Others of you, I know in this room, have called me and said we want to do other things as well. So the question for us is there a way out of this RFP process to extract some capital money to do some upgrades, mostly to the lands to the north, perhaps here as well, that would make this a museum-friendly location? And then also, can we extract, or will one of the RFP proponents, who I imagine are here today, also think through a way to have perhaps a not-for-profit, like Royal Ontario Museum type board of directors that can work with the RFP winner of the proponent and winner of the bid to say, okay, that land there will be the museum, there'll be one ticket, you'll come in here, you'll go upstairs, there'll be some displays for the museum for Toronto story here, then you'll take the tunnel will be very, very beautiful, and will also tell part of the story. Then you go to Austin Terrace, the north of Austin Terrace section, the hunting lodge, the potting shed, the stables, and you'll get more of the story there. Or maybe we don't have the money for that, and the only thing we can do for the next little while is just the hunting lodge. Like, all that stuff needs to be kind of thought through. The one little caveat before I pass it back to you or get the hook is this. It's about the money, but it's also about the compelling vision. The compelling vision, for those that I know many of you here live in Ward 21. The Witchwood Barns, what drove that process was the compelling vision. You get the vision right, the money comes. There's a lot of money in Toronto, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of civic pride, there's a lot of philanthropic interest in this project. So we have to set about that compelling vision. Second thing is and sometimes we don't like to talk about it, is the money piece. And we need folks, because every time, at least we've done our analysis and discussions, yes, you can make this place a thriving center, and an entrepreneur can make some money here and fix up the place and get air conditioning and so on for an event space and for a tourism space. But then when you throw the land north of Austin Terrace in, or perhaps the basement here, then the money piece doesn't work out so well. So you need that philanthropic piece to be married to the entrepreneurial piece. So that's where we really need to be smart, we need to be clever, we need to be both visionary and business-like to make this the asset that we think it can be. And seeing this wonderful crowd here today, I think we can do it. I think we can do it. We want to do it. Josh and I are quite happy and willing, and we just see this as a wonderful project to champion. And we need your participation and support in making that happen. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nicole. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, it's a great setup. So just in terms of how we're going to use your time, we're booked from now until 9 o'clock. Mike's got about 15 or 20 minutes just to go into a little bit more detail on some of the pieces that the councillors were talking about. But the vast majority of the time tonight is dedicated to hearing from you. So I'm just going to highlight on the agenda, there's two things, pretty big picture, and they're already been set up, that the city's interested in hearing from you on. One is about this building and this property on the south side of Austin Terrace. So what are your priorities for the main building and opportunities to expand on its role in presenting Toronto's history, which is just that first box under discussion. And then the second one is feedback on the future of the buildings north of Austin Terrace. So there's a little bit of a outline, and Mike will go into it in a minute, but the question is, what are your ideas for the future uses of the Casa Loma properties to the north of Austin Terrace? And we want to have a good discussion about that, and then we're going to wrap it up. There's some timelines and next steps that Mike will cover, but I'll just hand it over to him. And if you have any questions for Mike or either of the two councillors, if you don't mind hanging on until Mike's done, and then we'll have lots of time to talk about it. All right.
What do you do in this city?
I'll just tell you that right now. So my name is Mike Williams. I'm the General Manager of Economic Development and Culture for the City of Toronto. I wear a second hat I'm also chair of the board of the Casa Loma Corporation that is currently running this facility. So I sit with two hats as general manager of economic development culture within the group's responsibilities that I work in is our City of Toronto museums, of which there are 10, including Spadina House, which is right over there. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Councillor Havoc already talked a little bit about it. I'll put it into a little bit more list with some dates, talk about some of the conditions, basically so that everybody has at least some degree of knowledge before we start this discussion, which is obviously the key part. I love the fact that two councillors are here. It's so keen and enthusiastic. It makes my job and the staff's job a lot easier when we have that kind of support. Eva Pyatt is the current CEO of Casa Loma, is doing a great job of running it. A bunch of her staff are here tonight. I'd like to thank them for staying late and helping out in the organization of tonight's event. So this is what we're talking about. Casa Loma grounds, which I call the South Complex, and then the North Complex, which includes the hunting lodge, the potting shed, the stables, with that big tower on the stables. We have been focusing all of our repair, renovation, rehabilitation, spent almost $20 million just on fixing up this building so it doesn't fall down. So most of that money has been spent on the outside. There's still $3 to $5 million to go before the outside is done here. So the wall, the Norman Tower, which is on the southwest corner, right up there, is really held together by chicken wire right now. So there's some significant work that's still needed there. The North Complex, other than emergency work, because parts of the roof are sliding off and we're a danger to people walking nearby, so we've done work there. But by and large, that area has not had much attention to it over the last 20 years. There is, in most of that complex, no heat, no water, so it can't be used as a special event or museum kind of space at this stage. And we require another $20 million, upwards, $15 to $20 million to fix up the north, just to make it physically sound, not to outfit the inside of it. So there's a lot of money, as the councilor's already mentioned, that is going to be needed just to get things up to a level in which we're sure that we'll have the building for another 50 years. None of those numbers include fixing up the space. So we have an old elevator in this building, which is not up to standards for helping people in wheelchairs, etc., move around. Things have to happen there. A lot of the inside of the building is the same as when I came here as a 10-year-old. So for the first and only, until I took this job, I was only here twice in between that time period, which is part of the challenge, and which is why in the end it didn't make sense for Kiwanis, from their point of view, or for the cities, to stay, because of the amount of money it was going to take to rehabilitate and redefine the uses inside this building so that people would come here more often than once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime if they happen to get invited to a special event or a wedding here. More particularly, for those of you that aren't familiar in detail with the grounds, of course, the Casa, as it's properly called, I call it the castle. The garden, which a lot of tender loving care and a lot of money has been put into the garden. It's gorgeous when you're here. The hunting lodge, which is the house that Mr. Pella lived in prior to the castle being built, which is at the corner here of Austin Terrace and Walmer. Then the potting shed, which is the long building that runs down along here with a nice front facing. There's been work done to fix that up. The stables in here, which has my favorite room in the whole complex in it, which is where the horses had certainly a lot better quality of life than many people have. And the rest of the complex, including the tower there. So let's talk a little bit about timelines. started building it. Mr. Lennox also designed the old City Hall, for instance, as one of his other major buildings here in Toronto. Mr. Pella had it, Mr. Pella built it, Mr. Pella couldn't keep it. It became a hotel for a period of time. Eventually, it got turned over to the city, and in 1937, the Kiwanis ran it for a long time. They did well for good works, they did well by the building. I'm very thankful that the Kiwanis were involved for so long. We may not have the castle if it hadn't been for the Kiwanis. But we got to a point in time when the tourism competitions heightened in Toronto, when special events competition heightened in Toronto. Kiwanis weren't able to put the management skills nor the investment into it. In the end, we negotiated a settlement with Kiwanis, and the city retook management of the castle, pending figuring out a long-term solution. So that's that decision was made in 11, and then this year, council, as Councillor Mahavik just described, council said, okay, basically, we took a look at everything. Sell it as a residential building, sell it for redevelopment, put in a university. We looked at all those options. We had a public meeting to brainstorm more options. And in the end, the conclusion after looking at all those, weighing all those, putting them in front of council, was that as a institution that had public access and as a special event space, that's what the future of Casa Loma should be around. It's not appropriate for the city itself directly to run it as a line division. Let's see if we can find somebody to come in here with money, with ideas, with imagination, with energy, and reinvigorate the use of this building. At the same time as council made that decision, we had the quandary of what to do with the North Campus and what to do to recognize the heritage of the building. So we have now two sort of directions that we're designing so they fit smoothly together. One is to focus on a potentially commercial, doesn't have to be, could be a nonprofit operator with all that same things I just described, operator on the South Campus, but we know because of the capital investment needed in the North Campus, commercial operators highly unlikely to be interested in that on its own as a commercial enterprise or as a profit-making exercise. Just going to take too much money. So let's also do a request for expressions of interest at the same time, so the processes are melded together, and search for ideas of what to use the North Campus for. Up until now, for the last 20 years, it's an archery range. What else do we do? Not much. I'm looking at Eva. Sorry? Film shoots.
We're shooting a car commercial right now.
Car commercial, so Nuit Blanche, no real programming, nothing that requires people to have to use any kind of water or any kind of heat. So it's hugely underutilized. Has been for a long time, unfortunately. So I talked a little bit about going forward. You can see the conditions that council has made sure that we respect. The public access that Councillor Matlow began with is a critical one. But what we're hoping for is that somebody will come forward with money that will either put their own money in or pay rent or lease payments enough that we can re-put it back into the building. So the building is solid forever, and they can put money into the interior to make sure that there's programming to enliven and generate more money, and hopefully more money for more than just this building. Also, to recognize the history of Toronto, back to Mr. Pellet, one of the first central vacuuming system ever in Canada here, first electrically lighted big building in Canada. I should know my history here better, but first elevator. Pardon?
Telephone.
First telephone system, switch system. So Mr. Pella was a very visionary individual and did a lot and sort of walked the talk on where he saw the vision going for here. And there are others that are here already, Queen's Own Rifles. You were mentioning, Councillor, sort of little museums spread around Toronto. In the basement of the church opposite Roy Thompson Hall, anybody remember the name of that church?
St. Andrews.
Thank you. As St. Andrews is a clue, it has a little museum for the 48 Highlanders in the basement there. So we have lots of those kind of spaces hidden around the city. And to have a place that we can feature as the central part of that system of museums is obviously something we should all be striving for. North of Terrace, we talked about a lot of things. And so the museum idea is one. I'll just talk a little bit about the museum timeline. Councillor Mahavik mentioned the fact there's been lots of starts and stops. 10 years ago almost, council passed a new culture plan, which is the first organized plan to boost culture and the role the city has in boosting that culture here in the city. One of the things it called for was the creation of a Museum of Toronto. And at the time, it then commissioned some feasibility work, and the Canada Maulding site at the foot of Bathurst Street, right near Billy Bishop Airport, was the first sort of site, because everybody could imagine the maulding site wasn't needed for what it had used before, but in the end it became an impractical site for a museum. Further work was done, and the old City Hall itself was first identified. It was found to not be museologically, did I say that right? Designed, because you have to have lots of clear open space to be able to build and build and display the artifacts and tell the stories. So chunked up space with a bunch of little rooms doesn't work very well for a museum. You also have to have museological standards, so the air has to be conditioned, cool in the summer, heated appropriately, and humidified appropriately in the winter. And Old City Hall has those challenges, as to some other buildings we know about on this site. So there are a lot of challenges for where a museum should go. The site north of here has significant grounds that could potentially be used in combination with the existing buildings. So some of those things need to be looked at. But currently, the official city position still is the courtyard at City Hall, because you could build Old City Hall, because it's got a central courtyard. You could actually build quite a nice building with clear floors on the inside of the courtyard. But as both councillors mentioned, that's not a cheap solution, and these days, unless somebody was to step forward with a significant amount of philanthropic money, that's not going to happen. So now we have a process to try to get ideas for what we should do north of Austin Terrace, and we have more particular focus on trying to find somebody that would manage and run this building and this grounds. And we need to keep those linked. We don't want to bifurcate and totally ignore the joint history of both north and south complexes. So that's why we're doing these things simultaneously. It allows us to move forward on this building in potentially a faster way, but also be moving forward on the complex north of here. So this is the day we will release. We're going to do the RFP, request for proposal for an operator, in 2 phases. First phase is to find people that are financially, historically, and management competent to take over the management of this castle. Try to. So we will do what's called a request for proposal qualification. So a pre-qualification to find those groups that are prepared to then go into a second actual bid process to seek to become the manager of this building. So that's on the far left side. On the north of the Austin Terrace, we'll start a little, so that process will start in sometime in December. We're still trying to figure out all of the protocols we've got to go through, but we're getting pretty close to that. And so that'll be released in December, the process, pre-qual there. Meanwhile, early in the new year, probably earlier than this, we will release the REOI and let it sit out there while we search for people that are interested and have interesting ideas for as long as possible, and then bring them back together again late in the spring. And if depending upon how the ideas mesh, we will work with the proponents on both processes. So, I'm going to turn it back to Nicole. I guess first to run a quick Q&A with myself and the councillors, and then further into the feedback sessions.
Perfect. And just so people know, there's a few handouts, and we also brought a few in if you need them, but we have copies of the council decision if you want to see it. And we also have a 2-pager that describes the Toronto Museum project, sort of summarizes that. There's hands kind of up. While we're doing this, you can put your hand up. And then, I think those are the 2 big ones. We also have the notes from the last public meeting. Okay, so before we ask you your opinion about what you think about the future of the north side and the south side, do you have any questions or clarification? So let's sort of stick to questions and clarification and before we weigh in. Yeah?
Well, the one is for a museum. How much do you want to exhibit? How much is there, rooms-wise or size-wise?
How much space do you need?
Yeah.
How much space do you need for a museum?
We don't have enough space ever in the city to display all things, like all museums. You never have enough space. Terry, the Museum of Toronto was looking at, let's say, 100,000 square feet, ideally. Roughly 100,000 square feet, which is more than what we have, even if you add the 2 complexes here together.
May I add though, that if you look at Chicago's museum, it's as big as about 250,000 square feet, but the city of Montreal has 8,000. So there's no one absolute that we need to arrive at to work out what fits.
So is it fair to say that you would like to use a lot of the castle for a museum, if possible?
I think reasonably we should look at the properties on the north side of Austin Terrace as much as possible to utilize that space, because it's more difficult to utilize those for event purposes. And then in the casa itself, whatever space we realistically can make available that won't be used for event space, certainly off the top of my head, the basement certainly, and it connects with the tunnel. The 3rd floor, which is currently used for administrative offices. I adore the staff who work here, but they've got some of the nicest offices in the entire city.
I've been up there.
So there are spaces here, but obviously we need to work in concert with the winner of the proposals as to how they need to use the space for their events as well.
Thank you.
And the Museum of Toronto, I think in terms of, Councillor, you can help me out, but the Museum of Toronto, the direction on where to put the Museum of Toronto in the council decision is north of Austin Terrace. So just to be clear on that.
May I add, I think we need to think this through pragmatically. Maybe at the beginning it is only the castle and it's only the basement. And then as operating revenue comes in from the proponent, from the profit side of the Casa Loma business, then you can start thinking about the tunnel and the hunting lodge and the potting shed and then the 330 Walmer Road and of course the stables themselves. So it has to be as we can afford it.
And by the way, last miscellaneous fact, the basement here is larger than the entirety of the Montreal City Museum. So we can start, and once we get a foothold, we can build from that.
Okay, so the woman at the back and then up here. Go ahead, question.
How many square feet are available north of Austin Terrace then?
How many square feet are available north of Austin Terrace?
So 25,000 square feet is my memory. Somebody want to change it? That's fine?
Yeah.
25,000 square feet.
Okay, up here.
Yeah, with the changes being proposed, how much of the interior of the building would be affected? Like how much would change?
Are you talking in this building or the north building?
Well, I'm just curious.
So I'll answer that, and we might flip it to somebody that's more historical. This is a very historically designated structure, as are north of Austin Terrace. So within the constraints imposed by the council restrictions and heritage preservation will dictate what happens. The easy answer to you is we don't know until we go out and put an RFP out as to what people will come back with. But I don't imagine anything that's going to look dramatically different than what you're looking at right now.
Will the
Question
Spadina
here.
Museum continue to be operated as a separate entity?
Sorry, say that again?
Will the Spadina Museum continue to be operated separately?
So good question, and I'm going to answer that question plus a little bit. We have 10 museums, including Spadina House, excluding Casa Loma already in the city. So we do display, in a way, some of the history of Toronto. If you go to the Scarborough Museum, which is in Tommy Thompson Park, it's almost a log cabin history of Toronto, all the way through to Mackenzie House on Bond Street. And so trying to meld those is one of the challenges. Spadina House is a little bit of an awkward situation. The city doesn't own that property entirely. We co-own it with the province. So that creates some governance challenges. And there are some other restrictions in the agreement we have, but that is an option we would obviously look at as much as we could.
Can I add to that though?
And we do, by the way, we do some joint work with them already.
Yeah, this, of course, is a very historically rich part of the city. In the immediate walking vicinity of this place is, of course, Spadina House. We also have the archives. Within a couple of blocks away, we have the tollkeeper's cottage. And I see Ed Levy here looking at some kind of rail museum or public transit museum. One possible location is the west-south corner of Davenport and Bathurst. There's a long barn there that is heritage designated, and TTC has this, well, their square foot requirements would require about a quarter of that. So you can see this as part of the development of a heritage district. Well, the steps are here as well, and of course there's a process, for those of you who live in the neighborhood know that there's a process underway to designate this whole area as heritage significant through a conservation bylaw.
Okay, so I kind of was working right to left. I've got this gentleman over here, and then I'm just going to circle back and come around. Yeah.
So do I understand that the purpose is to raise money to maintain the building, so the building will not fall down? It's going to be maintained in the future. This is perfect.
Is the main purpose of this to raise money
With
to?
the city, so that with the city taking over the site, that it won't be false fate of what happened to the city to deal with it, which the city ran won't be followed as not longer the building.
You're saying is the main purpose to raise money so that you can maintain this beautiful building?
So the city has been putting money in so far. The amount of money the city has available to do that is limited. The city is planning to continue to put money in, but that lengthens the time period to do what you just said in terms of maintaining the outside structure. The city has no money set aside to do anything on the interiors of any of these properties. So that's one area we need to do fundraising on. Plus, commercially trying to generate funds to speed up the renovation and the enhancement of the facility. And as Councillor mentioned already, the potential to find a third source, which would be philanthropic, to help speed all of that up again.
The museum would be good because you will get volunteers to help with some work.
Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3 next. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry, here and then over. Yeah.
The Ontario Lottery and Gaming Commission, is it possible to partner with them? I know they have mandates to support cultural activities throughout the city, and that's probably the best way to raise money anywhere in the country.
Is that a bleak question of whether putting a casino in?
Cultural properties.
Yeah, one thing, it's not going to be a casino. Okay? But the
I
rest
got it
of
written
that.
down. Yeah, right.
Whether funds through the Trillium Foundation, which is how OLG contributes to a lot of these, I don't know if we've used those kind of sources in the past, Terry.
City can't apply for it.
We cannot apply for that funds. It has to be a arm's length.
Is there a way of creating a
I
partnership?
think we'll put it down on the list. The answer is I don't know. We'll try. Okay.
Go ahead. Question.
You use the word meld, so I just have to ask, are you advocating for the centralization of existing state museums, i.e. closure of the location?
Do you guys hear that? No. Are you advocating? He used the word meld with museums, and she's wondering if the city's advocating for amalgamation of all the city museums.
That has not been part of this discussion. It's certainly, given the fact that Councillor Mahevic and I were the ones who brought this idea of the Toronto Museum to council, that was never part of our proposal, never part of our musing. Each museum that we have in Toronto offers something special, and they focus on specific and unique features and stories and neighborhoods and families, etc. And as Councillor Mahevic said, we've got thousands of small ones all over the city, as we should. But if you visit Chicago Zoo, the perfect example. I was just there over the summer. That's one place that you can walk through facility and just learn the story, different eras, different generations, everything from civil rights to industry, etc., and learn, get a sense of who and what that city is when you leave. One thing I just wanted to add, so no, we're not suggesting anything, we want to add. I mean, my personal view is that we don't invest today what we should in arts and culture. Chicago is another example of a city that puts $25 per person into arts and culture. We put 18 here in Toronto. Yet when I was in New York 2 weeks ago, a council member there said, your city is known for arts and culture. I was so gratified that she didn't mention Rob Ford, that actually it was arts and culture that she brought up. But we need to invest rather than withdraw the funding. One thing I just want to add about the museum and the question about is this about raising money for, so it doesn't fall down? I would submit that a museum, in fact, complements and contributes to the attraction of coming to events. Imagine a wedding or a gala event with the museum as a backdrop. I think it actually is very complimentary.
Okay, right
I
here.
just want to, from a staff
We got a whole bunch of
perspective, I want to kill that concept. I did not in any way mean that we're planning on closing any museums. Planning to keep them open, invigorate them, keep them more programmatically active. So no, please. I get shot when I get back to the office.
Okay, I'm going to work my way quickly across. If questions are short and answers are short, then more people will get questions.
Does the green space beside the stables, is that part of the stables or is that city parkland? And does any of the space by the hunting lodge kind of connect to that? Because I know there are houses in between, but I wasn't sure.
There's no houses. The houses go up the side here.
Yeah.
So this property all here is all, this is green, this is all green, it's green back there, green in front of here. So what it can be used for, we have to totally decide.
But Mike, this is actually governed by the Toronto City of Toronto Parks Department. However, there's a picture in the hunting lodge that shows that years ago there used to be these greenhouses that used to shoot out of there. That's how it was historically. But right now, this is not part of the Casa Loma complex or campus. This is City of Toronto Parks and Rec, but there is a good substantial piece of land back here that one could see, at some future date, if this really did take off, that you might even be able to build off the back some additional Toronto Museum facilities.
All right, any more questions? Questions, sir?
And then the worry that if you have RFPs, you'll get the private sector coming in, and the private sector want to make a profit. And the guys make profits, the guys like Madame Tussauds museums, which do very tasteful museums, but they're still profit making, or casinos or Loblaws, the thing they did to maybe gardens. How are we going to make sure that we have a very good, well-protected Casa Loma without guys like Madame Tussauds or Ricky Figure not coming in?
So part of the reason for tonight is to get those kind of restrictions out on the table.
Okay. And that's exactly, as soon as we're finished with, the questions of clarification are really intended to be answered because without having the answer, you don't have an opinion, or at least not an informed opinion, right? So we're just kind of really quick on questions, and then with opinions is the rest of the meeting. Question.
So the problem is money. There's a history of going to the Queen and asking for royal patronage for a lot of historical buildings for it to be safe. And then it's really like we're presenting the castle to the Queen for her Jubilee, but we're not really giving it to her because what she's really doing is giving us money to historically uphold it and make sure that it doesn't really go into disrepair. And I think with the relationship with Sir Henry and the monarchy, in his the history, I think if we presented that to the Queen or to the monarchy, it might be something they'd actually consider. And that would help with the money problem.
Is it a question as whether these guys would consider that?
Yeah, would you consider that, or have you considered that? Because I think we have to think outside the box and not just keep on looking at things from a very bleak perspective.
Everybody else is going to want to weigh in with their opinion now on how to do it, so let's just questions of clarification and then we'll move on, okay?
I'll give a quick answer. I've never considered that option, to be completely honest with you. I didn't even know it was an option. That being said, though, the Queen legally actually owns all the land under which we have structures in the entirety of the country of Canada. So therefore, she actually probably should give us some money.
Okay, question, sir?
Question before I get too severe of a headache. When do you on introducing a hands-on feasibility study on what you can actually do with the property and what you can actually get from the property and what money you can actually get, because the Queen's proposal is as much a fantasy as a lot of the other things that are said. But what's the value of throwing out all of these museum fantasies and gathering everything when you don't even know how much it would cost to reconstruct or redo the building that you have on the other side of the road, the hunting lodge? Is there an actual feasibility study going to be planned? And why don't you start with that rather than this exercise, which we've already gone through? You had another meeting for this, and there's no summary of that meeting here as well. So the purpose is what then? To gain neighborhood support? Is that the idea? So Josh and Joe can say, look, this is our museum.
Okay, I've got 3 questions there. Do you want me to stop or keep going?
Spadina House is a beautiful structure, but if it gets over 100 people a day, I'd be surprised. Casa Loma gets 300,000 a year. You toy with that, you try to fix that structure, and you could end up with a real white elephant that's going to cost the city a lot more.
Okay.
Do you have an idea of how much it would cost to do all that you plan to do?
So the first question, I've got 3 questions there. One, what's the value of, is there a possibility of doing a feasibility study, or is this what is incorporated in this task? Why don't we start with that? Is there, and how does this connect to the last public meeting? And I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but I went over all of that, and there's a summary of what happened and how it informed the discussion at council. So there's a real strong connection. You can actually have mine if you want. And then the third thing is the purpose here to gain neighborhood support. And obviously this is all with an underlying, there's a worry we're doing another white elephant exercise. So let's start with the first one on, is there value of feasibility study?
So on the South Campus, we did a feasibility study. We did a lot of costing, a lot of revenues. That report's available. We'll send you the link afterwards. It was part of the council consideration. So, and the consultant that ran the study is standing behind it. So we've done that on
That's
the
Loud Hall. These people can't see, but.
Sorry, Loud Hall, HLT.
So that's where the 20 million came from that you were presenting?
No, I'll come to that in a
Okay.
second. So that provides a solid background on the South Campus. On the North Campus, we commissioned Taylor to do a state of good repair costing for the North Campus and what's left still to be done here. Those numbers in that report are available. So we have that information. In terms of what is feasible inside the building, that is exactly why we do a request for expressions of interest, to find out what people think could go there. And they will have, the other thing that's also happened recently is that the historical designation is being updated by the city's of Toronto's Heritage Preservation Unit. Scott, who works in that unit, is over there. And that report went to the Heritage Board on Friday? Today. So the heritage designation and the permissions and what can and can't be done, or which parts and which elements of the site, both sites, are, I don't know what the right word is, but our focus of attention, if you will, has been done, and Scott is available to answer any questions on that. So we feel as staff that when we made the recommendation to council, that we had enough information to go forward on the feasibility. All of these are welcome, whether people into what, I don't think we should at this stage at least jump to any conclusions on any ideas, but that's Nicole's job to say that.
All right, any more questions you need answered before you can weigh in with your opinion about what is happening here? Okay, 2 more, and then I'm going to go to the next stage. Go ahead.
I'd like to know what kind of studies have been done regarding the history of Toronto Museum in terms of the feasibility of the number of people that would visit our museum, considering that when people come to Casa Loma presently, it captures their imagination in terms of international appeal.
I'll say something quick, and then Terry Nicholson is acting director of the culture section and is involved with that. But back in the timeline, we did do a feasibility study with outside consultants. And then when we did the second one, that came up with the use of the old city hall, there was further work done on that. That work was done by Lord Consulting. That involved a lot of consultation process. So there's a fair amount of work. There's 2 reports at least that are public knowledge, they're publicly available. And if you'd like the links, I'm happy to provide that to you after the meeting.
Yeah, I had something I think is important to state, just in case this is a concern of yours or anyone else's, about the impact of any changes that would happen here on the Pellet family exhibits themselves. This is, sir, this is their home. They created this. And nothing that we proposed as far as the museum goes would have any adverse effect on the exhibits for the Pellet family. In fact, we also believe that the Queen's Own rifles need to remain because it was part of Sir Henry's legacy as well. So we don't want to do anything that has an adverse effect on that, but really contribute around it, especially in facilities here that really are underused today.
Sir, do you have a question?
Yeah, my main question is about the cost to complete this building. And you said they're in the study?
Yes, so we have price quotes that I think come to about $5 million to do the exterior wall.
Right.
And to fix the Norman Tower and a few little other things.
And what about air conditioning and upgrading services?
That's not included in that $5 million. So upgrading services within the building, respecting the heritage aspects of it. So air conditioning in this whole building would be very difficult to do technically and still preserve the heritage assets. You can't drill holes through walls very easily here.
We have a follow-up question.
I'm just wondering, well, what consultation, if any, took place with the Volunteer Museum?
With the creation of the crystal and all that?
No, I mean, just
No,
generally in this process.
They were interviewed
Okay.
as part of the first part of the study, so they were on our interview list. Right?
Okay, I'm from the museum, so maybe I could check back later
Sure.
to see.
You can talk to Lyle.
Who you interviewed. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah. What learnings can we take from the demise of the Pier Museum several years ago, which was the replacement of the Marine Museum, to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen with a potential City of Toronto museum?
Sounds like you know what you.
I don't know.
Okay.
So I'll answer Terry, correct me if I'm wrong. Both the Marine Museum and the prior elements had problems with location, getting flooded out of the last one they were in. Somebody mentioned the Gill Inn before. We have some sad stories here that it's my job to make sure we don't repeat it. So any lessons that people can give me and give us as staff to make sure we don't repeat those. Part of the huge challenge here is to make sure that we have a way of generating funds to provide sustainable funding. And so, which is one of the reasons why we're going out with an RFP to try to find, hopefully, a solution there.
Okay, that's a great way to sort of transition in, because we have just over an hour left. And I could ask everybody for 10 minutes of their opinion, and we would have our own all night or all day discussion. So all I want to do is take 10 or 15 minutes just to talk to the people you're sitting next to and see if you have the same opinion regarding the future of the North and the future of the South. And those are exactly the questions that are on your agenda. The first one, feedback on the future of this main building. What are your priorities for the main building and and opportunities to expand on its role in presenting Toronto's history? And then the second one is feedback on the future of the other buildings, ideas for future uses of properties to the north. If you need a copy of the council decision, I'll drop one on, I'll walk one over. I'm also going to put, and you can use this or not, so don't worry about it. It's a blue version of your agenda on every table. And if you turn your agenda over and you turn the blue one over, there's a little room to write. So if you don't have a chance to say what you came to say, or you're sort of talking to your table mates and realize you actually have a totally different opinion, just make sure you write down your points. And we have a box up the front. Everything we receive in writing will be part of the meeting record. Everything we heard last time was really helpful in informing the council decision. If you want a copy of our main notes, as I said, I can hand those out too. But just do that for sort of 10, 15 minutes. Turn to the person beside you and see if you have the same thought about the future, north or south. And I can tell you that, and then I'll come back and check. And we'll do a full room discussion for the remainder of the meeting, right?